Now, with all apologies to these 3 slides of death by PowerPoint, I think it's worthwhile for us to understand what these prerequisite requirements are going to be. So servers, DNS, and also certificates. So let's spend a minute just talking about just the kinds of servers and the configuration for your direct access server that you'll need to think about before you ever start installing any roles and role services. Now, if you recall back in that last module, we talked about how a remote access server in a lot of configurations is one that is generally in a work group. However, when we installed our remote access server back in that last module, we made it a domain joined server. In the workgroup approach, the remote access server uses some network policy server or radius services in order to do the authentication. This is different in the domain join world where it can do the authentication itself because it's part of the Active Directory domain. Well, that was kind of done slightly on purpose because the servers and the clients in a direct access implementation have to be domain joined for this whole thing to work. Now that should automatically in your brain insert this kind of sketchiness associated with a domain joined machine connecting directly to the public internet. In a lot of environments, the security people would not really have a great day with you configuring that domain joined machine with direct access to that internet. Well, direct access actually has a variety of different ways in which it can be implemented. In most of those configurations, there are actually a requirement for 2 different NICs, your inside NIC and your outside NIC. Now, in this demonstration environment, we're trying to keep things simple. So we have that server that's domain joined that has a NIC on the inside and a NIC on the outside so that it can process all these incoming VPN and eventually direct access requests. Well, that configuration is one in production you may want to alter slightly because whereas the 2 NICs are required for the configuration we're using, there are a pair of other configurations that might be a little more appropriate in a production sense. For these, you can connect up your direct access server through some kind of gateway device. So an ISA server, a TMG server, some sort of firewall that sits between your domain joined direct access server and the rest of the world. Well, in either of those configurations, you can choose a 2 NIC or a single NIC configuration. The long and short of it here is that in most situations, 2 separate NICs are great because at the very least it separates out the inside traffic from the outside traffic, whether or not you're connecting through a gateway device or not. Now, back in previous versions, the direct access server essentially had to be that and only that. But here with Windows Server 2012 and R2, we have the ability to conjoin the traditional VPN services with the direct access VPN services. And you might think, well, why in the world would I want to do that? I mean, if I have this always on VPN, why do I need to have a traditional VPN as well? Well, there are some circumstances where having a traditional VPN available can provide, I don't know, extra security or an extra pathway in for external clients. The long and short of it is that being able to do direct access and VPN on the same server just simply reduces the amount of hardware you'll need in order to support all these different external connectivity use cases that you may have. Now, one of the reasons why Direct Access did not get a lot of play during its early iterations back in the Server 2008 and R2 days was that one of the early requirements for DA was this need for 2 consecutive public IP addresses. Now, not only were they public IP addresses, but they needed to be consecutive, meaning if you had a 1.2.3.4, you had to have a 1.2.3.5 address as well. This introduced a bit of a challenge for a lot of people because for the larger organizations, this was probably not a problem, but for some of the smaller organizations, the relationship you had with your provider was such that it may be difficult to actually get those consecutive IP addresses. Microsoft has since partially resolved that limitation here in this version, and only a single public IP address is now required. Now, if you do want 2-factor authentication, you do have to have those 2 consecutive IP addresses. But for this, our simplified deployment scenario we'll be working through, we're only going to use one public IP. Direct access also, because it's an always-on situation, the assumption then is that it is always on. And the services, the protocols that direct access uses tend to be highly consumptive of available system resources. So in a production implementation, it may be a good idea for you to use more than a single server for connecting in those external clients. DA servers can be load balanced with up to 8 different nodes, so you can spread the load across all those different nodes. And this is for not only having multiple different nodes to receive clients, but also to spread across those system resources that can be required for the processing of direct access traffic, the different protocols that are coming in.